The UK housing market is walking into one of the most dangerous and misunderstood periods in modern history, and most people don't even realize what's unfolding right in front of them. This isn't just a slowdown, it isn't just a correction, it's a structural shift that could change who owns property, who gets locked out, and who quietly loses thousands, sometimes hundreds of thousands, without ever seeing it coming. And the scariest part? The warning signs are already here, but they're being drowned out by headlines that keep telling you everything is stabilising or returning to normal. But let's be brutally honest. What's happening right now is not normal. House prices across large parts of the UK are getting worse. Affordability is collapsing, and the gap between those who can own property and those who can't is widening faster than at any point in the last 30 years. If you own a home, if you rent, or if you're desperate to buy your first property, what you're about to hear could change the way you look at the market forever, and could save you from making one of the most expensive mistakes of your life. Because while some people are still clinging to the belief that property only ever goes up, the data tells a far more uncomfortable story. We're seeing price stagnation in the south, outright declines in certain postcodes, desperation from sellers who bought at the peak, and silent panic from homeowners whose mortgage payments are about to explode. And it's not coming next year, it's happening now. The UK property market has split straight down the middle. On one side, you've got London and much of the southeast grinding to a halt, with asking prices being cut and properties lingering on the market for months. On the other side, you've got parts of the North and Midlands still seeing growth, fueled by affordability, job migration, and investors chasing yields they simply can't find in the capital anymore. This isn't just a regional difference, this is a full-blown divergence that's reshaping the entire property landscape. In parts of London, annual price growth has flatlined or turned negative. Some boroughs have seen drops of 3 to 6% over the last year alone. Meanwhile, places like Sunderland, Middlesbrough, and parts of Greater Manchester have seen price rises above 7% year on year. That's not a gentle imbalance, that's a structural fracture in the market, and it's forcing people to ask a question that would have been unthinkable a decade ago. Is staying in the South even worth it anymore?
The brutal truth is that wages have not kept up with house prices. Even with London salaries being higher on paper, the cost of buying a property has outpaced income growth so aggressively that the traditional logic of move south, earn more, live better no longer stacks up. In fact, for many, the opposite is now true. A household with an average income in Leeds or Nottingham can now achieve a higher standard of living, lower debt stress, and better financial security than a similar household clinging onto an overstretched mortgage in London. And this is where the real problem begins. Over the next few years, hundreds of thousands of homeowners are about to be hit by what can only be described as a mortgage shockwave. These are people who locked in to ultra-low fixed rates when money was cheap and borrowing felt painless. 2% mortgages, 3% deals, the kind of rates that made even eye-watering house prices feel manageable. But those deals are expiring, and they're not being replaced with anything close to what people are used to. When someone comes off a 2% fixed rate and re-enters the market at 5%, 6%, or even 7%, the increase isn't small, it's devastating. Monthly repayments can jump by £300, £400, sometimes £600, depending on the loan size. That's thousands of pounds a year sucked straight out of household budgets already strained by energy costs, food inflation, and stagnant wages. And for many families, that increase simply isn't sustainable. What happens when people can't afford their mortgage anymore? They sell, and not because they want to, because they have to. Forced sellers don't hold out for top prices. They accept offers. They cut asking prices. They flood the market with backlog supply. And that's exactly what we're starting to see in certain parts of the UK right now. Properties that would have been snapped up in days during the 2020-2021 frenzy are now sitting for months. Estate agents are quietly advising sellers to adjust expectations. Listings are being reduced again and again. A house that launched at £350,000 is suddenly £335,000, then £320,000, and eventually sold at £305,000 just to move it on. These aren't rare cases. They're becoming increasingly common, especially in overheated southern markets. And while house prices wobble, rents keep rising. That's the contradiction confusing so many people. How can property be getting worse while rents are soaring? The answer lies in supply. The UK is losing landlords at speed. Buy-to-let investors are selling up in record numbers, driven out by higher interest rates, tighter regulation, increased tax pressure, and diminishing returns. Nearly 1 in 5 landlords sold property in the last year, while far fewer replaced them. That leaves fewer rental homes chasing the same or growing number of tenants.
So, while house prices weaken in certain areas, renters are squeezed harder than ever. Monthly rents are climbing, competition for decent properties is fierce, and tenants are facing bidding situations that were once reserved for buyers. It's a bizarre but dangerous situation where owning feels impossible for many and renting becomes more unaffordable by the month. Now let's talk about a group nobody wants to acknowledge: the negative equity homeowners. These are people who bought at the peak using minimal deposits, often with government-backed schemes or stretched affordability checks. The value of their homes has either flatlined or dropped slightly, but their mortgage balance remains high. This traps them. They can't remortgage, they can't sell without taking a loss, and they're stuck paying rates that keep rising. Help to Buy created thousands of situations like this. While it allowed many people to purchase homes they otherwise couldn't have, it also artificially inflated new build prices. Developers priced in the demand, buyers paid a premium, and now, years later, some of those properties are worth less than what was originally paid. That's a slow financial suffocation that rarely makes headlines. On the surface, the market looks like it's simply cooling, but underneath, there's pressure building from every angle. Mortgage resets, landlord exits, cost of living strain, stagnant wage growth, reduced buyer confidence. All of it creates the perfect conditions for prolonged suppression or uneven decline in property values, especially in areas that were already stretched beyond realistic affordability. And here's the uncomfortable truth most people don't want to hear. The days of effortless property wealth are over. The era where you could buy almost anything and watch it double in value over 10 years, that was fueled by cheap money, loose lending, and economic conditions that no longer exist. What we're entering now is a far more disciplined, data-driven, yield-focused market, and those who don't adapt will suffer quietly. Investors who understand this aren't panicking. They're repositioning. They're moving away from overpriced postcodes and towards areas where rental demand is strong, pricing is realistic, and long-term fundamentals support growth. Places with good transport links, growing employment hubs, universities, and regeneration investment. They're not buying emotionally, they're buying strategically.
For first-time buyers, this period feels terrifying. Rates feel high. Prices still feel expensive. The ladder feels taller than ever. But the reality is that this may actually be one of the few windows of opportunity where negotiation power genuinely exists. Sellers are more flexible. Competition is lower. You can secure discounts that were impossible 2 years ago. The key is not rushing, not overpaying, and not buying just for the sake of escaping rent. And for homeowners already on the ladder, the warning is clear. You cannot afford to be passive. If your fixed rate ends within the next 12 to 24 months, you need to be planning now, not when the final letter arrives, not when the rates shock hits.
You need to understand your options, your affordability, and whether staying put still makes sense in your long-term financial picture. The UK property market isn't collapsing overnight, but it is quietly shifting into something far more unforgiving. A market that punishes ignorance and rewards preparation, where ownership is no longer guaranteed just because you have a job and a deposit, and where survival increasingly depends on understanding the reality beneath the headlines. This is not panic, this is awareness, and the people who listen, who study the data, who act rationally instead of emotionally, will be the ones who weather what's coming. Those who ignore the signs, they'll wonder how things got so bad so quickly. The housing warning signs are not subtle anymore. UK house prices are getting worse in the areas that matter most, and the conditions that created the last boom no longer exist. The only question left is whether you'll recognize what's happening in time to protect yourself, or whether you'll learn the hard way when the numbers no longer add up and the market no longer forgives mistakes.